And we will be speaking now with Nucleus Shelton, a labor organizer here in South Florida. And I really want to thank him for taking the time to talk with us today, because I understand that Nucleus is a very busy man. In fact, we have caught up with him in the middle of his workday. So thank you so much, Nucleus. Yes. So, Nucleus, how has the pandemic changed your workflow? How have you transitioned into work at home and all that? Has the change been drastic? What's up with it?
Yeah, it's definitely been a change. Labor has definitely been, you know, more accustomed to holding in-person meetings, membership meetings, coalition meetings, and having to utilize different video platforms in order to meet has been a shift that the entire labor movement has been trying to grapple with. Because we're very used to meeting and conversing in person, and planning actions in order to heighten public awareness around particular issues. So the pandemic has specifically the social distancing mandate has made a lot of that more difficult to do. But labor will continue to find innovative ways to communicate to its members and for us to do collective.
Nucleus, I'm concerned that now with 33 million unemployed, in the pandemic, how has that impacted activism in South Florida? Because you're someone that I have seen a lot in certain protests at the airport, at hospitals, fast food places. I mean, I've seen you in very, very active. In fact, we even got a comment from you once while you were arrested for doing civil disobedience. So you have a lot of in on the ground experience in South Florida, and now with the social distancing, I keep hearing how people are trying to come up with substitutes, like doing caravans, doing protests that are like at 6 feet of a distance. Do you really think that that will be an okay substitute for the type of rallies that used to happen before? I mean, I get the impression that it's insufficient, to be honest. That it has impacted the struggle for workers' rights in a negative way.
Yeah, I think that unions right now are starting creative ways in order to do collective action campaigns. Um, the union representing hospitality and hotel workers about 2 weeks ago, they held a caravan of members, about 150 members, came out to Speaker Jose Oliva's office in Hialeah, and they did a display to ask the speaker to draw more attention to the current unemployment benefits crisis. Um, Labor has to fight. You know what I mean? It's not like activism is put on hold. Like it, we have to mold to this, and we have to find creative ways in order to get our message out there, and make sure that our members are able to weather this storm. Uh, Case in point, this Friday at 11 a.m. In Overtown, there will be different unions that'll be coming out to do a die-in, in order to a die-in, for folks who aren't aware, is you using your bodies as agencies in order to convey a message, right? And they'll be doing this to tell the general public at large that workers still have not received any unemployment insurance payments, and that something needs to be done immediately. This will be done while following CDC guidelines around social distancing. But labor will find a way to creatively engage in collective action because we have to, you know.
Yeah, no, I like how you mentioned that compared to certain types of activism on certain issues that can be put on hold for a moment. The reality is that with workers' rights, you can't just say, well, we're going to take this week off because every week families need that paycheck. And right now, I think it's so important to push for hazard pay, paid sick leave, all sorts of expansions of healthcare for these workers. And Nucleus, do you think that the fact that we have now 33 million people unemployed, is that good for unions? Is that bad for unions? I mean, I'm concerned about the quality of life that most workers will begin to experience now when they go looking for jobs in a marketplace that is just flooded. I mean, can we kiss goodbye the dream of a $15 minimum wage? Is it just going to be tougher to push for these reforms and greater greater better working conditions and all that?
Uh, that's a tough question to answer. Um, I feel like unions at this point are starting to look at the pandemic as a real moment for organizing. It can be used as a tool for organizing members into a union. And we are asking that workers who are on the front line get adequate protective equipment,
Right.
that workers who don't have a union have access to be able to join one, and demanding things like hazardous pay. So it's a real organizing moment for the greater country. I mean, when a country hurts, labor hurts. So I definitely wouldn't see this as beneficial, but I'll see it as a real organizing opportunity.
And how long have you been working with unions and fighting for workers' rights?
About 3 years now.
And in those 3 years, um, here, particularly in South Florida, there is a notoriously bad atmosphere for your line of work, your line of activism, even. It's tough. It's tough down here. I mean, I would say that even maybe in the South in general, but especially when you hear workers saying that they're afraid to join a union because maybe that would hurt their job, or other myths such as being afraid to look socialist, or other insane myths out there. What would you say is the greatest, or several impediments, obstacles that are unique to Florida that you've encountered or that you've heard others suffer down here while trying to advance workers' rights?
Yeah, well, Florida's a right to work state, so it's a bit difficult. Workers are considered at will employees. And aside from that, we have a legislature who is very interested in pushing through different preemption measures. This previous session, there was something introduced around the conditions of employment, local business regulation. So the state wants to roll back this concept of home rule, and making it more difficult to advance workers' rights locally. Florida is definitely a different environment to organize in for unions. But as I'm saying, as I said prior to, we're going to continue to shift and mold to the current context to expand union density, and reaching individuals who don't have union at their workplaces. We
And
don't mourn, we organize.
and with regards to politics, um, do you find that politics or politicking and the usual game of politicians, does it get in the way of workers' rights? I mean, maybe more specifically, my question would be, which party do you find that it is easier to work with? Do you find that it's hard to work with Republicans or Democrats, or do you prefer independents? I mean, which party, and not just the individuals, like individual politicians, but the general culture that each party projects, which have you found that offers like an easier playing field for advancing workers' rights? At least in the contemporary time, in
Yeah,
contemporary history.
I don't know. Like there's a need to form coalitions um, with members of both parties. Like if one
Mm,
party is controlling,
yeah.
in order to push back against legislation, it's important to have deep relationships and educate elected officials on working issues. It's not a
Okay.
partisan issue. It's like what is going to affect working families,
Right.
uh, and I guess through the contemporary context, a lot of folks on both sides of the aisle have continued to sell out working people to corporate interests,
Mm.
and that's the fault line. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Uh, you can have a Republican who understands the value of labor, um, and you can have a Democrat that understands that same value as well. Um,
So
I think,
would you say that it at the end of the day it really just matters on which politician? It's more like an individual in person thing, or
yeah, without campaign finance rules, elected officials are susceptible to corporate sponsors who can finance their campaigns.
right?
You know, if I pay you money in the long term,
Mm-hmm.
you owe me something.
Yes.
And that's a problem because a lot of those uh, quid quo pro type of negotiations end up selling working people out in the long term.
And Nucleus. So what you were presenting here is a very superior, I would say, approach. I actually like that about union work, how it does go beyond the partisan lines and has a focus more on just, well, the American worker. Um, what would you say is a solid piece of legislation that has passed or that you would like to see that passes in the future that protects the nonpartisanship of that position, but is like super good for workers? Because I'm kind of like scrambling, thinking, what is this? What is something that would benefit both workers from both parties that doesn't divide us more? Because I'm actually very concerned about the division that is growing between both parties now here in America. But then again, it could be something that passed. So have we had some really good piece of legislation or something that you would want to see
Yeah,
that comes
yeah.
up?
Well, thank you for the question. Something that I would really like to see passed in the coming months. The House of Representatives just passed uh, House Resolution 2474, other known as Protecting the Right to Organize.
Mm.
It has cleared the House and now it is headed to the Senate. Senate Bill 1306 is its companion. So it makes amendments to the National Labor's Relation Act. Specifically, it modernizes and codifies a lot of important measures. At the current moment, um, a lot of employers drag their feet on recognizing a first union contract.
Mm.
What that piece of legislation does is it excessively fines employers for not recognizing the union contract in the first 10 days.
Okay.
And on top of that, it prohibits the hiring of replacement workers during when workers engage in collective action.
Mm-hmm.
It adds teeth to the National Labor's Relation Act, and it really deals a blow to right to work legislation around the country. So if there's anything that needs to be passed within this current moment, is the Protecting the Right to Organize Act.
Right. Yeah, I'm concerned about how in the middle of this pandemic, you see that clearly the essential workers are exposed to many risks. And they're essential because we really do need certain services. But I'm concerned that in the middle of the pandemic, with no vaccine in sight, people like bus drivers or delivery persons or anybody working at the post office, that they will be more exposed to these dangers, and that in the end, even if you do pass like a hazard pay or something to mitigate the danger, that we will jump into this culture in which certain types of workers are replaceable. And I mean, I'm talking about also how there are certain jobs that will require unique protection because due to their nature, they can't you can't function with a mask or gloves or things like that. And do you think there's something that we can do right now while everybody's just scrambling to pay their bills? I mean, families are overwhelmed. It really is a severe crisis where you have like mental health issues on the rise, depression, and families unable to feed themselves. Really serious problems. Do you think it's possible then that the general culture that we have will begin to chip away at good things that were passed, things that were accomplished by workers? Like, I'm really worried that with everybody overwhelmed, we might descend into a culture in which workers' rights, like their quality of work, will downgrade. And is there something that at the individual level people can do to kind of like promote a healthy culture? Like, I don't know, maybe sharing certain articles or informing themselves. Like, how can the individual contribute to have in America a really solid, healthy, and prosperous working class? Where, I mean, obviously we can't ship back the jobs that were lost to China. Like, there are certain limitations that what the individual can do. But what would you recommend people do? I mean, should they support unions? Should they, what essentially should they do?
I would recommend, if you don't have a union at your workplace, form one.
Really, just flat out, just do that.
Correct.
And is there like a process, like a very simple sketch of what people can do to form a union? Should they just go to a specific website? Like, let's say I work some place that has horrible working conditions. How can I form a union? As an intro, a brief introduction.
I mean, there's definitely a lot of layers to that. But I would definitely say getting a committee of folks that you work with and getting in contact with a union who would fit the classification of that work would be the recommendations to help building out a campaign.
So not starting something from scratch. You should identify which unions would apply to your type of your line of work, right? Oh, okay. That would make it easier. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's going to take a lot of, just to help you from any legal roadblocks that you may get, in front of, or there's a skill set there that you need to draw on. So, yeah.
And Nucleus, as somebody who identifies and clearly is a labor organizer, do you have any preference for any of these two programs that people are either on the call just dropped again? Oh no. Oh goodness, we didn't lose either. There was just an introduction. Okay, are you on the board of the universal basic income, or federal jobs guarantee, or none?
I haven't really looked into either, so I don't really have an opinion.
Okay. Because sometimes when I ask people that are like really kind of concerned about workers' rights, they're a little skeptical about the UBI because they say that it just like relegates people to just at like a spectator, pushes workers to the side of the road, and then they're not really active. And Nucleus, with regards to unions, I mean, I have so many friends that have negative opinions about unions, where they're afraid to join one, or from a more conservative point of view, they'll say, "Well, I'm not sure that it is applicable for every job." What is like the best selling point you would give for anybody who's skeptical and sees unions as like a cumbersome obstacle for workers?
Well, they are the union, like it's a conglomerate of like workers' interests represented through an organization. So if they feel like the union isn't, they need to take a more active role in their union if there's any contention. So that'd be my recommendations for anyone who is reluctant
Okay.
or has some.
And when you say collective bargaining,
Yes.
I love the term, by the way. Is it a known fact that that it works? Because you see the protests, and at the end of the day, most people are not aware of what the results were. I want you to tell us honestly if it really does produce lasting results. Like, is it really worth it?
It is.
You believe in it?
I do believe in collective bargaining. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely, 100%.
And here in South Florida, what is an example that you could remember that was urgently needed to be addressed and was fixed? Do you have like a recollection of any recent victory, something to get our hopes up, something to get us like motivated? Any recent real victories that people got what they needed through collective bargaining? Or is it a really tough battle here in Florida?
Yeah, we definitely received some victories in the past couple of months. Just trying to wrap my.
Early on in the day, like when I would think of unions, I just thought, well, people already got the weekend. You know, most people have helmets provided at work. There comes a point in which you think, well, how much can a union get people without us fixing society as a whole? Like, what greater good can you do outside of a union? Because I worried that maybe there is a limitation. So, as somebody who probably, I'm pretty sure you do, has a big concern about society as a whole, when you look at union work, what is something that you think transcends beyond the individual group that they're helping? You know, like that. Okay, to put it simple, how does society as a whole benefit from certain workers having a union? Like, what's in it for the rest of society if those people have a union and they get their stuff
I think
done?
it's important to note that the face of work is changing, right? The future of work looks, especially in COVID, as we try to get a vaccine or wrap our head around this illness.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of folks on the side of capital are going to try to think about ways to get that work done. In many cases, automated, which means more downward pressure on wages, which means a lot of folks may be out of work for work that was traditionally done by labor.
Yeah.
So I think folks have a lot at stake in this fight that unions are currently involved in.
And Nucleus, when I review Bernie Sanders' position on labor, he was criticized sometimes by certain progressives as not being outside of the whole focus of workers' rights, and people were concerned that perhaps he should have been a little bit more tolerant of immigrants and all that. So I want to know, what's your position on a personal level, how you see the idea of the cultural talking point that we have of immigrants coming into the United States and taking away people's jobs. I mean, as if there weren't plenty of jobs to go around, you know. So I want to see what you have to say about that talking point that typically Republicans have, and that they condemn Democrats for opening the borders and indiscriminately lowering, as a consequence, by having so many immigrants into this country, by supposedly lowering wages. What is your answer from a personal and also from a union point of view?
Yeah, well, we're definitely a country built by immigrants, and our diversity is what makes us great. So I think it's important to have folks who immigrated to this country into unions, because they're the most susceptible to being in conditions of that are harsh, and some folks even using their status as a way of further exploiting them.
Right. Yeah,
So
yeah, like when you hear cases of undocumented workers who are afraid to raise the alarm on certain working conditions because their employer knows their real legal status. Yes, that is definitely a concern. Because it just if that worker is afraid to do that because of he's being kind of like threatened by his employer, then it kind of just also lowers the working conditions for everyone, even the legal the American worker that has his papers all in order and all that. So you would say that there is no harm. There is no that American workers should not fear immigrants is what you're saying.
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay. Okay. Because again, in these days, especially with the addition of COVID-19, there's definitely a push, mainly from the right, to close up the borders, to just resort to the kind of like the tribal type of economies where countries claim to be self-sufficient and bring about this new type of policy, like a political speech that says to be focusing on workers, but only a specific type of worker. So I'm glad to hear that you have more of a broader view of what those workers are, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, my parents are immigrants, so it informed my view for
right.
sure.
Okay. May I ask where from?
From Guyana.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a strong organizing in the Caribbean too, so.
Beautiful. So there's some Caribbean here. We both got it. Definitely some Caribbean here. I'm definitely glad to be speaking to the son of an immigrant. Myself me being an immigrant. So, Nucleus, here in South Florida, we are experiencing a lot of unemployment now as a result of COVID-19. I mean, Hialeah was for many days the city in the whole United States with the most unemployed statistics. It was, and it is, really bad. What would you say? Because, I do speak to some of these workers, and they seem to have like a disconnect between what is their real life situation, mainly they're Hispanic, and then they want to connect themselves to the conservative, these days pro-Trump line that, in my opinion, does not reflect and will not benefit their current working conditions, because they claim to be part of the 1%, but they're collecting all sorts of government checks, and they're in really dire circumstances. And to these sorts of people, which I try to tell them, forget about what you would like to be. You're not upper middle class. You're working class. You have all these problems. You have all these things working against you. What would you say is the greatest thing that we could tell people that are somewhat victims, that they're trapped within a political cloud and are, because of that political position, are unable to actively fight in the real world for their workers' rights because, I don't know, maybe they're embarrassed or they think that they don't need that. So what can we tell people like that to get them out, to just wake them up from that, to burst their bubble and get them on the right path to actually being engaged in their communities in a productive way that benefits working families? Because it is tough. It is tough getting them to wake up from that.
The $1 million question. I don't know. I'm still grappling with that myself. But I think that this pandemic has definitely shifted folks' consciousness around collective action, especially as folks who are struggling to get proper compensation from the state.
Yeah, about that, because the website was intentionally, the Florida website for the unemployed, it was intentionally made so that not that many claims got through, just as now it's quite obvious that the government does not want to know all of the COVID-19 deaths. They're deliberately trying to keep the numbers down for political reasons. And I think it's really unfortunate, now to just wrap it up, how politics sometimes, too often I'd say, gets in the way of workers' rights, where you have politicians trying to make careers, but effectively sabotaging the rights of workers. So, Nucleus, what would you say is something that should be on our minds right now? Something that we should focus on for helping working families? Because there's talks now that because of COVID-19, we should supposedly all now really try to push for Medicare for all, but I don't know. What's your position then? What do you think is something that is right now on the true list of highest priorities? The urgent thing,
Yeah,
like
yeah. I think one of the biggest priorities right now is trying to get certain things included into House Resolution 6800. It's
okay,
the uh, CARES Act, called the HEROES Act,
right,
Health and Economic Recovery Omnibus Emergency Solution Act.
yeah,
There's a lot of good pieces or provisions in the bill, but collectively, the labor community is urging Congress to protect mine workers by requiring that not only OSHA requirements, but mine safety and health administration to address emergency temporary standards in infectious diseases. So there's some real groups that are being left out of the HEROES Act, and we urge consideration and ask for folks to call their senators.
okay,
They can get live pass-through calls by dialing 866-832-1560, and it will connect you with your senator. And we are urging, deep consideration of groups who've been left out, as well as protection for multi-employer pensions.
okay. Thank you so much for that, and I hope people really get to it and become even more engaged. So, Nucleus, I want to thank you for taking your time to talk with us today, and I hope you get a lot more work done because the workers of America really need people like you to stand up for them.
Appreciate it. Thank you. I really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye bye.